Welcome to Fantasy Football today. We have a fun show planned for you today. We're talking wide receivers. We're going to give you breakouts, busts, talk rookie wide receivers, third-year wide receivers, and help you get ready to dominate your fantasy leagues, as always, for 2020. But before we get into the wide receivers, we have a fun day for you here on CBS Sports HQ. Coming up tonight at 6 o'clock Eastern, starting with Will Brinson and the Super Friends. We're going to break down the NFL schedule as the schedule is released for 2020. You do not want to miss that. 6 p.m. Eastern we start, and we go all the way through midnight. Going to be a fun night on CBS Sports HQ. I'm Jamie, that's Dave, that's Heath, that's Adam. Let's talk about the wide receivers. We're looking at our consensus wide receivers in PPR for 2020. Let's take a look at the list 1 through 12. No surprise with the guy at the top, the record setter, the record breaker, Michael Thomas, coming off a dominant performance last year. Davante Adams, the star in Green Bay. He's the lead singer. We don't know who the backup guys are going to be. We hope it's Allen Lazard. We'll tell you about him coming up. But he is a solo act as of now. Julio Jones, Tyreek Hill, DeAndre Hopkins. You see the usual names at the top, 7 through 12. Cooper Kupp, all the way down to JuJu Smith-Schuster. We'll talk about JuJu coming up in a moment as well. But let's start with the guy at number 5 in DeAndre Hopkins, making the big move from Houston to Arizona. Dave, you're still excited about Hopkins. We're a little bit more cautious in terms of how he'll do with the Cardinals. So tell us why he's number 3 for you this season.
Well, we can start with this. He's a damn good wide receiver. He's caught 70% of his targets each of the last 2 years. He's going to a team in Arizona that threw more passes per game last year than Houston threw in any of their 3 seasons with Deshaun Watson at quarterback. And I think this is the solution for Arizona in the red zone. I think he's going to catch a lot of touchdowns from Kyler Murray, and I think he's going to get a lot of targets. And all this talk about how they spread the ball around evenly in Arizona, yeah, that's how it got done last year. They had 2 receivers get over 100 targets. But go back to Cliff Kingsbury's days at Texas Tech. One guy was a monster for each of the last 5 seasons, every single year. I think it's going to be Hopkins who gets that opportunity in Arizona. I wouldn't be surprised in the least if he had 130 targets with the Cardinals, and it wouldn't surprise me in the least if he had well over 1,000 yards and double-digit touchdowns. Happy to take him toward the end of round 1.
130 targets would definitely be low compared to him, where he usually produces at a high level. Heath, where are you taking DeAndre Hopkins?
Yeah, I thought it was the low guy on DeAndre Hopkins, but I've got him projected for 140. So we should be good here. We just all need to move him down just a little bit. I think the thing is there's several unknowns for DeAndre Hopkins going into this year, and I just expect most of those unknowns to be worse than what he experienced in Houston. I don't think Kyler Murray is as good a passer at this point in his career as Deshaun Watson is. I don't expect, even if he gets 140 targets, that's a pretty big discount from the 10 targets per game that he experienced most of the time in Houston. And then you have to wonder, I mean, his yards per target dropped off a little bit last year, never really been elite in that regard. If you expect he's going to be around 8.5 yards per target, and you're talking about 140 targets, he's not getting anywhere close to the yardage totals that he was putting up in Houston.
Adam, where do you come out on DeAndre? You pro Hopkins with the Cardinals, or maybe a little bit more cautiously optimistic?
I'm kind of mid-round 2 with DeAndre Hopkins. I think there are a lot more running backs that I'd be willing to take ahead of him. Well, here's the thing. Hopkins has been a bit of an outlier because when you look at the elite wide receivers in fantasy in recent years, many of them, go ahead and look at this list right here, many of them are on high-volume passing teams. Michael Thomas has Drew Brees, Chris Godwin's had Jameis Winston, who throws for 5,000 yards, Matt Ryan, Aaron Rodgers will be up there in passing yards. The Rams are always up there in passing yards. Hopkins is the exception, and he gets that exception because he gets 30% of the targets on the Texans. So you either need to be typically on a high-volume passing offense or get a big share of the targets. I don't know that he's going to be on either one. I think Hopkins is tied very, very closely with Kyler Murray. And Kyler Murray threw for about 3,750 yards last year. If he can get to about 4,100 yards, that'd be good. If he can get to 4,300 yards, I don't think that's going to happen. That would be great for Hopkins. So I think he's definitely a round worse than he was last year, which was a mid-round 1 pick. I'm going mid-round 2 with him. And I think he'll go before George Kittle, but I'll start considering them in the same range.
Last year, we saw the Cardinals average about 24 rush attempts per game for the season as a total. The last 3 games, when they won 2 of their final 3 games, when Kenyon Drake was actually rolling, they were averaging 30 rush attempts per game. So they may want to trend a little bit more toward running the ball if Kenyon Drake gets going, like we saw last year, which would lower the pass attempts for Kyler Murray. Our projections only have him on CBS Sports going from 542 last year to 555. So going to be tough to see that volume necessarily go up for Kyler Murray. So Dave's optimistic about Hopkins. I think the rest of us a little bit more cautious. Adam probably the most so, taking him in mid-round 2. Let's look at another wide receiver probably going in round 1. That's Chris Godwin. Gets a new quarterback with Tom Brady. But what you didn't see on the list of the top 12 consensus rankings was Mike Evans, who, as we probably think, should be almost neck and neck with Chris Godwin, both guys producing at a high level last year with Jameis Winston. So Godwin comes in at number 6, but Evans outside the top 12. Adam, how do you think Godwin will do, and how do you think Evans will do, factoring in Gronk as well with Tom Brady in Tampa Bay?
I don't buy that Chris Godwin is a slot receiver. Tom Brady only throws to slot receivers. He's going to be amazing. I don't think that he's necessarily better than Mike Evans in that regard. I just think that Chris Godwin's awesome. Okay, I think this is a legitimate stud receiver. He got a lot better in his second year. He got a lot better in his third year. He's just continuing to blossom. I'd take him ahead of DeAndre Hopkins. And I think the Bucs are kind of tricky because I think they'll probably try to run the ball a little bit more. Their defense is going to be better. They're not going to have to throw as much. But Godwin, considering he can play inside, considering he can play outside, considering he just got a quarterback upgrade, considering that Rob Gronkowski, we don't know what he is or how healthy he's going to be, and there's no way he's going to play 16 games. I'd be surprised anyway. Godwin seems to me like a pretty safe receiver. You can make a case for him as the second one off the board in a PPR league. To me, he'd be 4th or 5th off the board, but I think that's the case for most people. But I think right around the 1-2 turn, I start looking at Chris Godwin.
So Adam's in New York. We're in Florida. We're not actually near Tampa, but I just heard a chair fall over when Adam said the Bucs aren't going to throw very much. Bruce Arians fell out of his chair when he heard that statement.
I said
the Bucs are still going to throw very much.
As much, Jamie. not as
okay,
much.
as much. All right.
Sit up,
Bruce, get back
Arians.
in your chair. You could be okay. You'll still be able to throw the ball. You'll still be able to throw the ball at a high level. Heath, you're a little bit more pessimistic on Mike Evans. You don't have him close to your top 12. I think he's barely inside your top 15. What's the concern about Evans now with all these mouths to feed in Tampa Bay and the new quarterback?
Well, I think you just said it. And as much as I like to give Adam a hard time, I think he's probably right about the pass attempts going down. Tampa Bay looks like they're going to be a good team. They won't be chasing the score as much. They won't be chasing interceptions as often. And their defense was pretty good in the second half last year. So I've got Brady just over 600 pass attempts for this year, which is a pretty considerable drop-off from how many times they threw the ball in 2019. And you just look at it with Chris Godwin running the types of routes that traditionally Tom Brady targets more often than the types that Mike Evans runs, with Rob Gronkowski and O.J. Howard and Cameron Brate there at tight end, and with the fact that for as long as we can remember, a quarter of Tom Brady's pass attempts have gone to running backs, I'm pretty concerned that there's only room for one number 1 wide receiver in Tampa Bay. There's going to be targets going to tight ends. There's going to be targets going to running backs. Mike Evans is going to have to be ridiculously efficient to be a top 12 wide receiver. I think it's definitely possible in non-PPR. All he has to do is score 8, 9, 10 touchdowns. He'll be fine. I don't think he has enough catches, though, to approach the top 12 in PPR, kind of like a Kenny Golladay.
Dave, the last time we saw Tom Brady with weapons like this was really 2007 when he had Randy Moss and Wes Welker, and we know Moss put up big numbers as the outside guy. Is it better off just maybe if you want a piece of this Bucs offense? Godwin could be a little bit too pricey, as Adam said. I think that's where he'll go end of round 1, beginning of round 2. Maybe just better off waiting on Mike Evans, see how far he falls.
Except I think in most leagues, you're going to see Mike Evans be a popular pick. We all agree that Mike Evans is going to take a step back in terms of target share, production. Heath's right. The efficiency has to be there for Mike Evans in order for him to be what he has been. And I think he can still claw his way to over 1,000 yards. I'm worried about those touchdowns. I'm worried about those big plays. I'm not sure the rest of the fantasy world will be up to speed on that. You almost want to let people take Mike Evans with a top 20 or so pick, PPR or non-PPR. Let them put him on their teams, and then you go and find somebody else that slips. Golladay is a fair comparison to Mike Evans. I think you can get Golladay a full round later than Evans.
The funny thing is that we're talking about Mike Evans being efficient, and he's put up great numbers in college with Johnny Manziel and in the NFL with Jameis Winston. And now he's getting the greatest quarterback of all time, and we're expecting him to struggle. It's just a very funny conversation that we're expecting to be less efficient with a better quarterback than he's ever played with before. So we'll see how these numbers play out for Mike Evans in 2020. I think he's going to be a great value pick if he continues to slip because of all the negativity we're just throwing at people saying to avoid Mike Evans. Speaking of trying to avoid wide receivers, Dave, you're telling people to avoid JuJu? What? You got him all the way down to 21? Tell us why.
Yeah, I'm not interested in drafting JuJu at the point where you guys are. I'm not confident yet. I need to see Ben Roethlisberger come back and look like the Ben Roethlisberger of old. But then I also need to see that JuJu Smith-Schuster is going to be featured in this offense, which is something that should have happened last year and didn't happen because of the Roethlisberger injury, and you really have to throw out most of last year. But look at how the Steelers have restocked their receiving core. Eric Ebron is there, that's a touchdown stealer. Chase Claypool could be the exact same thing to a lesser degree. We all think Deontay Johnson can take a big step forward. What's left for JuJu? Can he really average 10 targets per game? He's going to need it if he's going to have good volume. And then what's going to happen in the red zone? Is he going to catch a bunch of touchdowns? He's always good for a handful of big plays every year. It's the volume that I'm a little worried about, and it's the quarterbacking that I'm a little worried about. So I'm just not going to take JuJu in my drafts this year. I'm going to leave it to you guys.
All right, Heath. Tell Dave why he's wrong.
I will start by agreeing with Dave that I have a little bit of concern about Ben Roethlisberger. So that part I won't disagree with. But when we're talking about Chase Claypool, Eric Ebron, and Deontay Johnson getting in the way of a 20 guy at 22, age 22, had 166 targets, was one of the top 8 wide receivers in all of fantasy with Antonio Brown on the other side of the field. I don't think I have to worry about whether Deontay Johnson or Claypool or Ebron or James Washington are going to hold down JuJu's targets. As long as Ben is okay, as long as JuJu's okay, and they play 15 or 16 games, I think you're getting 150 targets for JuJu Smith-Schuster. He's going to be a top 10 wide receiver. I've got him just inside my top 12 only because I'm worried about Roethlisberger. If you could guarantee me right now that Roethlisberger's fine, I might have JuJu up there with Chris Godwin.
All right, Adam, break the tie. Are you pro JuJu or anti JuJu?
I'm pro JuJu. Look what he did his rookie year. I mean, his rookie year was really good. He had 7 touchdowns, something like 900 yards. And then obviously he busted out in his second season, still with only 7 touchdowns, but was a fantasy stud, one of the best receivers in football. Last year was obviously disappointing, but I agree with Heath. I don't think the guys that Dave mentioned are really target stealers, maybe a bit of a touchdown stealer in Eric Ebron, but those guys are complementary players to JuJu Smith-Schuster. He's certainly the best wide receiver on the team. If I have one concern other than Ben Roethlisberger, they might have the best defense in football. If not the best, it's top 5, it's up there. It became really, really good after they got Fitzpatrick last year. Do they have the personnel like the Ravens had to be a ground and pound team? I don't really think so, but maybe they start to trend more toward a ball control, rushing attack like we're kind of seeing in the NFL now. More teams are open to that. If they reduce their pass attempts significantly, it would hurt JuJu Smith-Schuster, but I still think he's the number 1 receiver. He's young, he's in his prime, and the sky's the limit for him. I think he's great. I'd take him ahead of Mike Evans.
I think the one thing, yes, we should obviously be concerned about Ben Roethlisberger, but the Steelers, I think, told us they're pretty confident in him coming back, not bringing in anybody, at least as of now, for competition to worry about if Roethlisberger's not going to be there. So it seems as if he's going to be ready to go, and that should have you a little bit more confident in JuJu. The one concern you could have, though, as we saw last year, if Roethlisberger goes down again. But at least coming into the season, Roethlisberger looks like he's set to be the starter for the Steelers, which would help JuJu Smith-Schuster bounce back and get that third-year breakout that he should have had last year, which was robbed from him when Roethlisberger went down in week 2 against Seattle. Let's talk a little strategy at the wide receiver position. Heath, I'll start with you. So let's say Michael Thomas is off the board. We know about the 5 or 6 running backs that are going to go at the top of the first round. At what point should we start to look at wide receiver? Are we going to throw guys like Miles Sanders and Joe Mixon and Nick Chubb into the first round, or is it after we see guys like Kamara and Cook come off the board? Again, Michael Thomas gone. When should those wide receivers start to go?
Yeah, I think you get Michael Thomas and those first 5 running backs off the board, and you can take Davante Adams right then and there. And there's a little bit of separation for me between Davante Adams and the next tier of wide receivers, but it's not that big. Austin Eckler is really the only other running back in a PPR league that I'm definitively taking before Chris Godwin, before Tyreek Hill. I'd also throw Travis Kelce in there, so I think you're going to look at a split of 5 or 6 running backs, 5 or 6 wide receivers in the first round, and then maybe a tight end.
Adam, we've talked a lot about the podcast about kind of the drop off at wide receiver. I mean, it could be as soon as maybe 4 after you get past Thomas, Adams, Julio, and Tyreek. For you, at what point do you feel like there's a significant drop off from the top tier guys to the second guys, and maybe from the second guys to the third guys?
I think you said it. Right after 4. I love those first 4 picks: Thomas, Julio, Adams, and Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill's a little bit risky in a PPR league because he's, an 80, 85 catch guy maybe. And, you want to be over 100 if you're going to take a guy in the first round. But his yards per catch, so incredible, and he should score a lot of touchdowns. The thing I do like about wide receiver, though, Jamie, is if you don't feel comfortable with that second tier, which to me starts with Hopkins, if you don't want to take one of those guys in the second round, if you'd rather take Travis Kelce or George Kittle or a running back, I think the wide receivers that you're going to get at the end of round 3 and even into round 4 could be just as good. I really think that Calvin Ridley, Amari Cooper, see how far Kenny Golladay falls. Keenan Allen's still going to be in that mix. So I think you've got a lot of depth at wide receiver through the first 3.5 rounds. But I just think that it's much more top heavy this year with those first 4. And then I know Dave likes Hopkins a lot there, and certainly there's plenty of room to debate. Maybe without Brandon Cooks, maybe Cooper Kupp just is a monster this year. But to me, there's 4 studs. And then I'm not super excited to take anybody until we get better value at the end of round 3 in a 12-team league.
Dave, give me the benefit of going wide receiver this year. We know it's a strategy a lot of people like to do, especially if they're at the back end of round 1 where you're missing out on those top 5 running backs. Tell me about what you could do if you go wide receiver, how you can build your team in a positive way.
It's a fantastic idea to have if you're in a smaller league, no matter where you draft, but certainly if you're in a 12-team league or a 14-team league and you're in the back half of round 1, early part of round 2, you're picking up 2 stud receivers that you're never going to question starting, and then you can load up on running backs rounds 3, 4, and 5, get your pick of the litter from the 3rd and 4th tiers of running backs. And then after that, you can pick up your 3rd receiver in round 6. There's still going to be good values there. And there's plenty of sleeper receivers as well once you get into 8, 9, and 10. Those rounds are going to be littered with guys with plenty of upside, including a lot of the rookies that we'll talk about today. It's fantastic, especially in PPR, because receivers in PPR obviously put up more points than most of the non-elite running backs in PPR. It's a great way to get points on your side in fantasy, which is kind of the objective of the whole game, right? You want points, go get them with receivers.
All right, so we had JuJu come in at number 12, had a good discussion about him, but he was a bust last year just because mostly losing his quarterback. When we come back, we're going to take a look at some guys that maybe have some bust potential going into 2020, or another player who let us down last year like Odell Beckham. Well, he bounced back now that he has a chance to be in his second year with the Browns. We'll tell you about some bounce backs, some busts next here on Fantasy Football Today. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today. I'm Jamie, that's Heath, that's Adam, that's Dave. We're talking wide receivers here. We're looking at our consensus rankings for PPR for 2020. Let's take a look at the list. 13 through 24 as we break down the second tier, or in some cases, the third tier of wide receivers. And some guys on this list that have plenty of potential, some huge rookies that could be sensational sophomores. A.J. Brown at 20, Terry McLaurin at 22. Those two guys have the chance to be really special after what we saw in their rookie campaigns. Brown really taking off once Ryan Tannehill took over for the Titans, and McLaurin dealing with a couple different quarterbacks in Washington. Hopefully we'll have a great rapport with Dwayne Haskins for the entire 2020 campaign. But I want to talk about some guys on this list that were in some cases disappointing last year, whether due to injury, poor play, or in AJ Green's case, just not playing at all. We'll start with Odell Beckham, who we thought would continue to play at a high level going from the Giants to the Browns, but that was not necessarily the case. So Heath, is he going to be a bust once again, or is he going to bounce back in 2020?
I think there's a little gray area in the middle here, but I'm going to go with the bounce back. I don't know that there's a huge increase in the number of catches he has. I think his yards will be slightly better, but the real area where Beckham should be better, almost for sure, is in touchdowns, only scoring 4 times last year despite a 1,000-yard season. I expect he gets up over 1,100 yards this year, approaches 80 catches, and his touchdowns double at least. Beckham's always been very, very good in getting into the end zone. He wasn't healthy last year. He hasn't been healthy for most of his career, to be honest, but he says he's feeling good right now. I think he gets off to a good start in a better offensive year for the Browns.
He always says he's feeling good. The one concern could be with the touchdowns. They bring in Austin Hooper, and you bring back David Njoku, and you still have Jarvis Landry if he's healthy with a team that's going to run the ball a lot. So you see our projections here, 6 touchdowns. Hopefully it's better than that. If he gets back to double digits, then if you're getting Beckham in round 3, maybe in some cases round 4, you could be thrilled with that production, but could be some extra mouths to feed in that Cleveland offense that hurt Beckham, and that's a little bit of a concern for me. Adam, you're really excited about T.Y. Hilton now that he has Phillip Rivers throwing him the ball. How good can Hilton be? Is he going to be a bounce back in 2020?
Well, the last 3 seasons he's played with Andrew Luck, he's been a top 15 wide receiver. And basically every single year that Phillip Rivers plays, he gives us a top 15 wide receiver. So it's not out of the question that T.Y. Hilton could be a top 15 wide receiver. I'm worried about the age. I am worried about the little nagging injuries that he has had. I'm not really worried about the rest of the receivers on the team. I think he's still the number 1 guy. I think he's still 1A, basically. They are going to run the ball for sure, but that's okay. I think T.Y. Hilton, he's so good on a yards per catch basis that he could have a 1,300-yard season. I mean, that might be a lot, but 1,200-yard season, very, very within the realm of possibility. Keenan Allen's usually in the 1,100 range with Phillip Rivers. So, yeah, I'm ready for a T.Y. Hilton bounce back. He's just dealt with terrible quarterback play. It's not his fault, Jamie. T.Y. Hilton's going to bounce back with Phillip Rivers.
How dare you disrespect Trey Burton like that, coming to Indianapolis to take targets away from T.Y. Hilton, saying that you don't worry about those other guys. I mean, Trey Burton of all people. Disrespect. A.J. Green hopefully will play and play well this year for the Bengals. Dave, you're excited about Joe Burrow. How's this all going to work for A.J. Green with the different offense? He's never played for Zach Taylor, and it all worked together for Green to be back as one of the top-tier wide receivers.
Well, I don't know about top-tier wide receivers, but as far as number 2 receivers go, I think he's a slam dunk to get there. And it's tough to give him the benefit of the doubt. He's missed at least 6 games in 3 of his past 4 seasons. He's 32 years old, and we know that it's going to take him a little while to develop the same type of chemistry that he had with Andy Dalton with the rookie Joe Burrow, especially since there's no offseason program. But he's a pro's pro. He's got all kinds of upside. I think he can still run fast and still make great cuts. And this should be a better version of the Bengals offense of last year. I think they're going to throw more. I think they're going to spread defenses out. And it could mean more one-on-one matchups for A.J. Green. And he should be able to defeat anybody that he lines up against one-on-one. So I'm optimistic that he'll be, like I said, top 24, top 20 type of wide receiver. And maybe give him a 30% chance that he finishes in the top 12.
Yeah, in some cases you get him in round 5, and that's not a bad bargain on the guy that, if he does play to his potential, could be an absolute steal in that range. Even late round 4 would be great value for A.J. Green. We're going to find out what the value is for Amari Cooper, who could be slipping a little bit now that the Cowboys added CeeDee Lamb. Michael Gallup is obviously still there. There are targets available. Randall Cobb and Jason Witten are gone. Adam, you're still moderately excited about Amari Cooper. I know you probably have a little bit of a downgrade built in, but where do you come out on Amari Cooper with now CeeDee Lamb joining the Cowboys?
Not so worried about CeeDee Lamb, but I'm going to tell you something. I mean, I just looked this up, and they're going to announce the schedule today. Is the NFC East playing the AFC North? Because if he has to face the Steelers and the Ravens, and he has to face the Rams, apparently, with Jalen Ramsey, and now he has to face Bradbury twice and Slay twice. I got to dig into this a little bit more, Jamie, because one of the things I liked about Cooper was he faced such a tough schedule last year. He faced Gilmore and Tre'Davious White and Lattimore and Ramsey and Darius Slay. And every time he faced a good cornerback, he had a horrible game. Well, it looks like he's got that again. So I was all prepared to tell you, no, Amari Cooper shouldn't be in that range. He should be around earlier. He's a steal if you get him around 4. But now I gotta wait for the schedule to come out tonight so I know for sure. I'm starting to think Amari Cooper might have some horrible matchups this year. And it's worth noting because he is not that kind of wide receiver that beats tough matchups. He'll destroy the easy ones. But if he's got tough matchups, that's a big red flag for Amari Cooper. So Jamie, my answer is incomplete. To be determined. Check it out on the podcast or on HQ at a future date, probably tomorrow.
The one thing to keep in mind, though, is maybe it helps Cooper that he has the additional talent around him, that you just can't focus on stopping him because Lamb could take off or Michael Gallup could have a big game. So maybe we don't see those corners follow Amari Cooper to the same level that they may have in the past. Maybe it helps him having the additional talent on the same field with him. Dave, where do you come out with Cooper? I mean, again, Lamb's there. Michael Gallup should still put up big numbers. Reason to be concerned?
Just to be clear, the NFC East does play the NFC West, so it's the Niners, Seahawks, Cardinals, and Rams. The AFC North, plenty of good, tough defenses there. And the Cowboys specifically have games against the Bucs and the Bears. So it is not an easy schedule at all. But you're right, Jamie.
Wow.
The fact that there are so many interesting receivers that the Cowboys have, I think it's going to lead to more inconsistency than anything else, where 1 week it's Cooper who goes off, the next week it's Lamb, the next week it's Gallup, and then back to Lamb, and then back to Cooper. And I wish it could be that predictable that we'll know which week is when, but I don't think there's going to be a week where all three of them will ever go off, and I think it'll be rare when two of the three go off. The one thing that I just keep in mind with Cooper is that he's played really well with Dak Prescott, and unlike Gallup, he can move in and out of the slot. And I would expect to see Lamb and Cooper play in the slot quite a bit. And I think there will be more favorable matchups there for both of those receivers against this tough schedule than there will be for Gallup. And that's why Cooper's still my favorite of the three. I think he's still a number 2 fantasy receiver. But Lamb is my second favorite, and Gallup is third on the list.
Yeah, I can understand that. I would still take Gallup over Lamb just because I think he'll get more targets, and he was so explosive in the targets that he had last year. So I think Gallup still has a higher ceiling, especially entering his third year. We'll have a better rapport, similar to Cooper, played very well with Dak Prescott last year. So I'll take Gallup over Lamb, but I understand where you're coming from. All right, so that's a three-headed wide receiver core that we're looking at with the Cowboys. Couple of duos that are interesting to talk about. We have the Rams guys with Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods. Now, Kupp is a guy that we have in the top 12 on our consensus, but Robert Woods is in this range. So Heath, as good as Robert Woods has played, last year was a down year for him because he didn't find the end zone on a very consistent basis, but why Cooper so far ahead of Robert Woods?
I think it's just what Kupp has done just throughout his career whenever he's been healthy and on the field. Now, there was a stretch last year in the second half where he kind of disappeared, but you look at him on a per game, on a per target basis, and he just screams elite production. We saw him get over 130 targets last year. I'd expect he's going to be right about that range this year. We know when they get in the red zone, Woods isn't going to have the terrible touchdown luck that he had in 2019, but there's no reason to think he gets anywhere close to the touchdown number of Cooper Kupp. So I think Kupp has a better chance of getting double-digit touchdowns. They're probably going to be very, very similar when it comes to targets. Woods will have more catches, but Kupp's going to have more yards and more touchdowns. That's worth more in fantasy.
And again, it's similar to the Bucs conversation. If you really want a piece of this Rams passing game and you're just looking at value, you might just want to wait for Robert Woods instead of reaching for Cooper Kupp, which we've seen him go in some cases the early part of round 2, which may be a little bit of a mistake if the touchdowns do come down. And Woods, and don't forget about Tyler Higbee, their numbers continue to perform at a high level, especially if Woods' touchdowns go a little bit more in the right direction. The other duo that I want to talk about here is the Seahawks guys, Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. We saw both of them have their high points last year. Lockett kind of fell off after going to the hospital that game after San Francisco. And Metcalf had some strong performances in the middle of the season. Adam, you're a big fan of DK Metcalf. I know you like Tyler Lockett as well. Should we kind of be maybe putting them closer together? Lockett should be so far ahead, or should it be closer to Metcalf where we have him here?
I believe Metcalf will have a better year than Tyler Lockett. I am the only person in the world maybe who thinks that, but I think they're pretty close when you look at industry rankings. I don't think any of you like Metcalf better than Lockett. I just think Lockett, look, Metcalf, great rookie year. 900 yards and 7 touchdowns for a rookie. You get to 800 yards as a rookie, that means you could be in line for just a monster second season. They've already talked about moving Metcalf around the field, which I think is important because he is going to face Patrick Peterson twice. Patrick Peterson held him without a catch last time they played. He's going to face Jalen Ramsey twice, but if they move him around the field, that will certainly help. He's enormous. He's fast. He's a different type of wide receiver. You just don't see people built like that. So I think he's got more potential than Tyler Lockett, who is really, really good. But I think Metcalf takes that step, has that second-year breakout like the elite receivers do. And we start talking about him in the second round in 2021.
Going to be interesting to see if he gets to that level. Could be a fun sophomore wide receiver this year. We talked a little bit about the schedule, how it can impact the Cowboys. We're going to give you a full breakdown of the schedule tonight on CBS Sports HQ, starting at 6 o'clock Eastern with Will Brinson and the Super Friends, and then getting you covered all the way through midnight as the NFL releases its schedule for the 2020 season. Give you a little fantasy take as well. That'll be about 8:45 p.m. Eastern tonight on CBS Sports HQ. If you want the best breakdown of the schedule, we've got it for you. All right, when we come back, we're going to take a look at how some rookies have impacted a few of the veterans that maybe have still some potential. Cortland Sutton, Michael Gallup, some third-year wide receivers, Deebo Samuel as well. We'll tell you about some of these wide receivers and the impact of the NFL draft coming up next here on Fantasy Football Today. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today. We're talking about wide receivers here, looking at our consensus rankings for PPR for 2020. I'm Jamie, that's Heath, that's Adam, that's Dave. Let's take a look at the list 25 through 36 as we continue to break down our players at the wide receiver position that we're targeting this season, or maybe some of the guys that we're looking to avoid. You got DJ Chark and Davante Parker on this list. Chark entering his third season. Hopefully the connection with Gardner Minshew will stay strong. I asked Chark at the Pro Bowl about that. He said, when Gardner came in, it was bombs away. I know Heath is excited to hear that. Hopefully we get more bombs this season between Minshew and Chark. And for Davante Parker, we'll have a new quarterback at some point during the season, with the Dolphins adding Tua Tagovailoa. We'll see if that hurts or maybe helps Davante Parker, who was very good with Ryan Fitzpatrick last season. But I want to talk about a few of the veteran guys on this list that were impacted by some rookies. You got Courtland Sutton, Michael Gallup, and Deebo Samuel coming in this range. And we'll start with Courtland Sutton. So Dave, he was very good last year, clearly the most dominant wide receiver for the Broncos, but Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler, both those guys are part of the team now. How is that going to impact the third year, hopefully breakout in Sutton?
Yeah, I think it's a bad news for Sutton, who was under a 60% catch rate last year, and it was even worse than that with Drew Lock. In fact, his yards per target with Drew Lock was barely at 7, whereas with Joe Flacco it was much bigger. So I think that with Courtland Sutton, you're going to see his target share go down, and I don't think he's going to be used as a downfield threat nearly as much. Certainly not like Hamler, who's a great slot receiver, and Jeudy can do everything. I'm nervous to draft Courtland Sutton. I wouldn't take him until round 5 at the absolute earliest. I view him as no better than a milquetoast number 2 fantasy wide receiver. Prefer to have him as a number 3. Don't see him having a year like he had in 2019.
Could end up being good value as a number 3 wide receiver, but I'm with you. It might be a little bit too risky to take him where we were taking him before the NFL draft, which was as a top 20 guy. Same thing for Michael Gallup. He gets CeeDee Lamb. Dave told you he would like Lamb better than Gallup as the second receiver behind Amari Cooper. Heath, where do you come out on Gallup versus CeeDee Lamb now that the two are on the same team?
Well, this was definitely a downgrade for him, and there's significant risk that at some point this year he gets passed by CeeDee Lamb. But I think it's important to remember that he was pacing just about equal to Amari Cooper. This was not a definitive 1, definitive 2 situation. It was a 1A, 1B in terms of targets and production. And there are plenty of targets to go around in Dallas. With Jason Witten and Randall Cobb gone, they wasted almost 150 targets on those guys last year. They can easily slot Lamb into this system, give everybody somewhere between 110 and 130 targets, and all 3 of them can have their moments in terms of fantasy production. I did downgrade Gallup, but I don't think I got downgraded him quite as much as everyone else. I still like him a lot as a number 3 wide receiver.
Same. I think, round 6 is probably the earliest you want to take Michael Gallup. Round 7 is kind of a sweet spot for him. And again, Dave would take Lamb over Gallup. I would take Gallup over Lamb. Sounds like Heath would as well. Adam, when you look at the 49ers situation, adding Brandon Ayuk to that receiving core, we know the 49ers seem to be very high on him. They had him as the second receiver off the board for them behind CeeDee Lamb. They get him at the back end of the first round. Emmanuel Sanders now gone. We don't know what's going to be with Jalen Hurd. Dante Pettis, not going to be a third-year breakout, I don't think. And so when you look at this 49ers receiving core, Ayuk could have a big role, but how much is going to impact what Deebo Samuel was able to do last year?
I don't think it's going to impact him too much, but when you look at what Deebo Samuel was able to do last year, so much of his production came in 2 games without George Kittle. So you have to remember that. But also he had Emmanuel Sanders there, and Emmanuel Sanders had 53 targets, 502 yards in 10 games. So he was on pace for about 800 yards. And as I said earlier in the show, 800 yards for a rookie is really good. I don't know that Brandon Ayuk is going to have 800 yards. I don't think he's going to impact Deebo Samuel. I think what's going to impact Deebo Samuel the most is the offense and just whether or not they're going to be willing to open it up a little bit and throw more. I think they will. I think they're ready for Jimmy Garoppolo to take the next step in his development. So I think Samuel will improve. I think he's a pretty good number 3 wide receiver.
We also saw Julian Edelman on this list, and we know the situation in New England. No Tom Brady. Seems as if they're going to go with Jared Stidham as the quarterback. Now we have Some other receivers that could step up, maybe this is the year for N'Keal Harry. They bring in Marquise Lee. They have Mohamed Sanu still on the roster. Names that but guys that aren't exactly very productive. So, Keith, is this the right range for Julian Edelman, or maybe should he be higher, or in some cases maybe even lower, even in PPR?
This is almost exactly where I have him projected, and often I'm there at the end of the 6th round, and Julian Edelman's the top guy on my board, and I throw up in my mouth a little bit and pick someone else because I just can't pick Edelman in this current situation. Now, maybe they go get Cam Newton and everything turns out okay, but with Jarrett Stidham as the starting quarterback, I don't have any confidence that really in anyone in this New England offense.
I think it's going to be the sentiment for a lot of people, and you just kind of settle for Julian Edelman, whereas in years past with Tom Brady, you'd be targeting Julian Edelman, and maybe feels the same way about Jarvis Landry, mostly because, again, adding Austin Hooper, you have the hip injury for Landry. We hope he's going to be ready for the start of training camp, but we just don't know. So, Dave, same thing. Is this the right range for Landry, looking at how productive he's been in PPR, or maybe a little bit of slippage coming?
Yeah, it's funny. Every year, we're not excited to draft Jarvis Landry, and every year he outperforms his ADP, and I expect this year to be no different, even though he's battling a pretty significant injury coming into the year. I think if you can get him right around 70th to 80th overall, even in PPR, that's good value, and he's good as a number 3 fantasy receiver who could develop into a number 2. I mean, he was basically a top 15 receiver last year for fantasy purposes. He was better than Odell Beckham. I don't think that's going to be the case this year, but I think he'll still be a helpful part for fantasy rosters. And even though right now you might not feel so good about having Jarvis Landry on your team after your draft, I bet by the middle of October you'll be really glad you drafted him.
All right, Edelman at 29, Landry at 31. You also see Stefon Diggs on this list. We're a little bit down on him necessarily. Not necessarily because of the expecting a big downturn in production, but we kind of think similar production with Josh Allen, so that's why we're not overly optimistic. If you want a good breakdown of Stefon Diggs, listen to our Fantasy Football Today podcast where our buddy Ben Gretsch defends Stefon Diggs whenever he can. So there's the list, 27 through 36. Let's look at the guys 37 through 48 as we continue to break down our wide receivers. Here are our consensus rankings for 2020, and when we look at this list, it's very interesting because now you start to get with the rookie wide receivers. You start to see the guys that we've been talking about maybe impacting some of the veterans, and this is the range where we're telling you to draft them. Jerry Jeudy at 39, CeeDee Lamb at 40. You see Henry Ruggs come in at 48, just a few spots behind Jalen Reagor, the Eagles wide receiver, at number 46. So, Adam, of these guys, I'll start with Lamb, Jeudy, and Reagor. Who's your favorite?
Of those 3, I would take Jerry Jeudy, but I like Jefferson better.
Well, tell us why. Make the case.
Okay, yeah, I just think that he steps into the Stefon Diggs role, and no, he won't be as productive as Stefon Diggs, but I trust Kirk Cousins more than I trust Drew Lock. I trust a number 2 wide receiver in Justin Jefferson more than I trust a number 3 wide receiver in CeeDee Lamb. And in terms of Reagor, I'm pretty enticed. I'm pretty interested in Jalen Reagor. I just don't know what the deal is there because I think they're going to throw to the tight ends a lot as they always do. And Alshon Jeffrey and Deshaun Jackson are at least going to start the year healthy, I think. So Reagor's a bit of a wild card for me, but he does have tremendous upside. I just feel like we kind of know what the role is going to be for Jefferson. I expect 90 to 100 targets from Jefferson, and I expect a pretty good rookie year. I like him. He's my favorite rookie wide receiver for 2020, not long term.
All right, Dave. He likes Justin Jefferson. You like Jalen Reagor. Make the case for the Eagles guy.
Love Jalen Reagor's fit in Philadelphia. They're looking for speed and wide receivers who can bring versatility, not just this year, but for a long time. And Reagor fits that bill. Unbelievable speed, plays bigger than he is, has really good hands. The numbers last year aren't fair to Reagor because TCU started a true freshman quarterback who was all over the map. Carson Wentz, a humongous upgrade in that regard. And I just think the opportunity is there for him to get a lot of targets. Alshon Jeffrey's on the wrong side of 30. He's coming back from a broken foot. I'm not sure how effective he'll be. He really wasn't that effective last year when he played. And Deshaun Jackson does worry me a little bit. I kind of like Deshaun Jackson as a very late round dart throw in best ball, seasonal fantasy play, because he could end up being, this sounds nuts, but he could end up being the number 1 receiver and the most targeted guy in Philadelphia. But if it's not going to be Deshaun Jackson, maybe he gets hurt, I'm confident that it'll be Reagor. I think he gets over 100 targets. I know that's rare for wide receivers. I think he gets there. And if Deshaun Jackson just misses a lot of time early and Alshon Jeffrey's not ready, I think the door is open for Reagor to get 120 targets. I'm drafting that all day long, starting in round 8.
Well, I think you're 100% right. If both those guys are out, then there's a huge opportunity for Reagor. But if both those guys are in, it'd be very tough for Reagor to reach the ceiling I think that you're looking at. So now we're drafting him optimistically because we don't know exactly where Jeffrey and where Jackson are going to be by the time we get to the start of the season. Jackson trending much more in the right direction than Jeffrey, still dealing with that foot injury. But if all those mouths are there with the tight ends and the running backs and how Philadelphia operates their offense, it could be a little bit of a struggle for Reagor to reach the ceiling. Heath, I know you're not necessarily a big Henry Ruggs guy, but we keep overlooking him. So if you can, just make your case about maybe why people should or should not be looking at Henry Ruggs in the same range of wide receivers.
Well, I mean, the reason we didn't talk about him yet, and the reason nobody wants him the most is because his quarterback's Derek Carr, and because Ruggs' speed is his best asset. We don't know how much he's going to get to use that. I do think it could be really interesting, though, if they just decide, Hunter Renfrow is not someone that's part of our long-term plan. He's already almost 30, so we're going to put Ruggs in the slot. And we're going to give him a bunch of targets close to the line of scrimmage and see what he does after the catch. We're going to have him running jet sweeps, and we're going to give him a few rush attempts per game. I think that is the path to him having a good rookie year, maybe even the best rookie year. He was the first wide receiver taken. He does have that incredible speed that you can't coach the other guys to get that. So he has an advantage built in on everybody. The Raiders are going to have to use him in the perfect way. It worked with Tyreek Hill in his rookie year, but he had Andy Reid. I'm just not sure that Carr and Gruden are going to get it done for Ruggs.
It's going to be interesting to see how Ruggs, how Judy, how Lamb, Jefferson, how all these rookie wide receivers go. Reagor also should be fun to see once we get to training camp and how these teams are going to use those rookies, especially once the season starts. All right, when we come back, we're going to give you a taste of some of our favorite late round sleepers, some guys that we're taking into double-digit rounds, and some players who could certainly outperform their average draft position. Justin Jefferson's the guy Adam likes, as you know. Darius Slayton. Could be fun for a lot of these young wide receivers going into 2020. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today. We're giving you a look at our wide receiver rankings for 2020. We broke down the first 48 guys, and now we're going to give you some late round sleepers that you could be targeting in the double-digit rounds. So, Adam, you gave us a sneak peek about your late round guy in Justin Jefferson. We did a Twitch with some fantasy football users on Wednesday night, and you took Justin Jefferson, I believe, in round 8. We gave you a hard time about taking him that soon, but defend the pick and tell us really how good Jefferson can be if he steps into that Stefon Diggs role.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I mean, I took him with the last pick of round 8 in a 12-team league. If I had taken him one pick later with the swing pick at round 9, maybe it would have been okay. And then later on, while we were doing the Twitch stream, you looked at the wide receivers that went after him, and I think you kind of felt like it was okay to take Jefferson, at least among the wide receivers. So look, he, going into the draft, felt like the consensus number 4 wide receiver behind the big 3. He ended up being 5th, one pick after Jalen Reagor. Really not a huge deal there. He gets, I think, a clear role. They're trying to replace Stefon Diggs. They're replacing him with Justin Jefferson. I think there's 90 to 100 targets there as a potential. I think there's a chance for 800 yards and 6 touchdowns. It's not going to be the type of season that wins you your league. It's a type of season that you keep on your bench, you use in bye weeks, or you use as a flex or something like that. And maybe he has a great year. He played the slot as a junior. He played outside as a sophomore, so he can do both. We know Kirk Cousins will throw to slot receivers. It just seems like a logical fit. He steps into that role that's vacated by Stefon Diggs. He gives you maybe 75% of what Stefon Diggs could be as a rookie, and maybe he's even better than that and has a huge year. I'm excited about him. I think he's got a really good opportunity to be very useful. Not amazing, but useful for your team.
Heath, tell us why you like Preston Williams this year coming back from the ACL.
Well, you see Davante Parker, it was like 3 slides ago in our top 30 wide receivers. The first 8 games of 2019, Preston Williams had more targets, more receptions, and more yards than Davante Parker playing on the same team. As long as Williams is healthy for the start of the year, I think he's got every bit as good a chance to be a top 30 wide receiver this year as does Davante Parker.
Dave, you got 20 seconds. Tell us the best Giants receiver for the 2020 season.
In PPR, it's still Sterling Shepard. I think he's safer. But the one with the most upside, and the one I would take first in non-PPR, is Darius Slayton. Unbelievable deep ball skills. Giants are going to throw quite a bit this year because I think they're going to trail in a lot of games. Slayton's got upside, and Jason Garrett prefers to have a downfield receiver as his number one option.
It'll be fun to see how Slayton, how Shepard, how Golden Tate operate with the tight end and Evan Ingram and Saquon Barkley. And we'll tell you the Giants are going to play if you check out our NFL schedule release show tonight starting at 6 p.m. Eastern with Will Brinson and the Super Friends. Get you covered all the way through midnight. Check out our Fantasy Football Today podcast as well. Thank you for watching Fantasy Football Today. For Heath, for Adam, for Dave, I'm Jamie. Want more of the Fantasy Football Today podcast and nonstop year-round fantasy advice? It's simple. Hit the subscribe button and hang with us all throughout the year.